What you are about to hear is not another comforting message about being endlessly kind or unconditionally giving. It is an exploration into something far more unsettling, a truth that Carl Jung uncovered through years of observing the human psyche. If you have ever felt that your kindness somehow turns against you, that people interpret your generosity as weakness, or that the more you offer, the less you receive in return, then this reflection may begin to explain why. Jung began to notice a recurring pattern in the people he studied. Those who identified themselves as deeply good, almost to the point of moral purity, were often the ones experiencing the greatest inner suffering. This raises a difficult question. What does it truly mean to be good? In modern culture, goodness has been shaped into a very specific image. It is the person who is always available, who never refuses, who forgives instantly, and who consistently places others above themselves without hesitation. On the surface, this ideal seems noble, but Jung saw something different beneath it. He realized that this version of goodness is not only incomplete, but potentially harmful. When kindness becomes indistinguishable from self-erasure, when love is defined as having no boundaries, we begin to participate in our own quiet destruction. Jung revealed a disturbing dynamic. The more intensely we try to embody perfect goodness, the more powerful our shadow becomes. The shadow is the part of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the traits we suppress because they do not fit our chosen identity. It is not destroyed through denial. It is strengthened by it. Like a force held underwater, it builds pressure until it inevitably rises. Imagine your kindness as a source of light. Society often teaches that to maintain this light, you must extinguish everything else. Your anger, your needs, your limits are treated as threats to your goodness. But Jung challenged this belief. He understood that real kindness does not come from denying parts of yourself. It comes from integrating them. Yet many people ignore the internal signals that tell them something is wrong. They silence the voice that says enough, believing that a good person would never think that way. They bury frustration, suppress anger, and dismiss their own pain, assuming these emotions make them less worthy. But every time you reject these parts of yourself, you are not becoming better. You are fragmenting. You are creating distance between who you are and who you allow yourself to be. This message is not asking you to abandon kindness. It is asking you to evolve it, to move from naive kindness into something more grounded, more aware, and ultimately more powerful. Because true kindness is not defined by the absence of darkness, but by the ability to hold both light and shadow without denying either. What you are about to uncover may challenge deeply held beliefs about love, sacrifice, and authenticity. It may feel uncomfortable, even destabilizing, but within that discomfort lies clarity. Real kindness does not diminish you. It does not drain you or make you invisible. Instead, it strengthens you, it expands you, it brings you closer to a sense of wholeness that cannot be achieved through denial. Jung's insight was simple but profound. To become genuinely good, you must first become whole. And that journey begins by turning toward the parts of yourself you have been taught to avoid. When Jung spoke about the shadow, he was not describing something abstract. He was pointing to a real psychological force that exists within every person. It is where we hide what we believe is unacceptable, the emotions and impulses we have learned to reject. For individuals who define themselves as kind, the shadow can feel especially threatening. Their identity depends on being the light, always supportive, always giving, always dependable. The idea that they might also carry darkness feels like a contradiction they cannot tolerate. But ignoring the shadow does not eliminate it. It gives it strength. What is suppressed does not disappear. It transforms. It leaks into behavior in ways that are often subtle but deeply damaging. This is why those who are excessively kind may experience resentment after helping others who never reciprocate. It is why they feel silent anger when their unspoken boundaries are crossed. It is why they experience sadness when they realize that no one seems to recognize their own needs. There is a paradox here. The more you attempt to be purely good, the more vulnerable you become to the unconscious influence of your shadow. If you deny your anger, it does not vanish. It becomes passive aggression. If you deny your need for acknowledgement, it may reappear as subtle manipulation. If you pretend you have no needs at all, you may begin to unconsciously drain others in search of something you refuse to admit you lack. Jung did not see the shadow as an enemy. He saw it as a necessary part of the psyche. It contains not only what we fear, but also what we have not yet claimed. Within it lies our capacity to assert ourselves, to establish boundaries, to recognize when something is not acceptable. When we reject the shadow, we do not just lose access to what is uncomfortable. We also lose access to our strength. Consider someone who has spent their entire life trying to be the good one. They were taught that anger is wrong, that saying no is selfish, and that their needs should always come last. Over time, they do not simply suppress anger. They suppress their ability to act in their own defense. Their kindness becomes restrictive, like a structure they cannot escape. What appears as virtue from the outside is often rooted in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of not being valued. Authentic kindness is different. It does not require the absence of conflict or the elimination of strong emotions. It requires integration. It comes from someone who understands their full range of experience and does not feel the need to hide parts of themselves to be accepted. When the shadow is acknowledged, it becomes a source of clarity and power. It reveals where boundaries are needed and where self-respect must be restored. This process is not about removing darkness. It is about learning how to engage with it. It means recognizing that anger can signal when something important has been violated. It means understanding that limits are not signs of selfishness, but expressions of self-awareness. It means accepting that the need to be seen and valued is not a weakness, but a fundamental human reality. The first step in this transformation is realizing that the shadow is not something to fear. It is something to understand. It has been waiting, often for years, to be acknowledged. And when you finally face it, you may discover that what you avoided was not something destructive, but something necessary for your growth. Blind kindness, when left unexamined, comes with consequences. These consequences are not always immediate, but they accumulate over time. They appear as emotional exhaustion, as relationships that feel one-sided, and as a persistent sense that something is missing despite doing everything right. The person who gives endlessly often pays a hidden price. Imagine someone who has made self-sacrifice central to their identity. They give their time, their energy, and their attention without hesitation. But in doing so, they begin to give away parts of themselves. Each time they ignore their own needs, each time they silence their voice to maintain harmony, each time they agree when they truly want to refuse, they lose something intangible but essential. This form of suffering is not always visible. It does not present itself dramatically. Instead, it appears in quiet ways, in sleepless nights spent worrying about others, in relationships where the balance of giving and receiving is never equal, in a life so filled with obligations to others that there is no space left for personal desire. Society often praises this behavior, labeling it as generosity or selflessness, without recognizing the deeper neglect that sustains it. Jung observed that these patterns often begin early in life. A person may have learned that being good was the only way to maintain peace or receive approval. Over time, this belief becomes internalized. It shapes behavior in ways that feel natural, even inevitable. But what once served as a survival strategy can later become a limitation. Relationships built on this kind of unexamined kindness tend to follow a predictable pattern. The individual becomes a source of support for everyone else. They are the listener, the helper, the constant presence. But when they need support themselves, they often find that no one responds in the same way. This creates a unique form of loneliness, one where you're surrounded by people who appreciate what you do, but do not truly understand who you are. The fatigue that results from constant giving is not just physical. It is psychological and emotional. It erodes the sense of self. It creates a disconnect between external behavior and internal experience. Over time, the individual may begin to feel empty, as though they exist only to meet the needs of others. This imbalance does not just affect the person who gives, it also impacts those around them. When someone is always available, always ready to help, it can prevent others from developing their own sense of responsibility. It can create dependency. In this way, excessive kindness does not always support growth. It can limit it. Perhaps most importantly, this pattern breeds resentment. Not immediately, but gradually. It builds beneath the surface, hidden beneath layers of politeness and obligation. And when it is not acknowledged, it begins to affect every interaction. What once felt like generosity begins to feel like a burden. This is the cost of unexamined kindness. It is not just the loss of energy or time, it is the loss of connection to yourself. It is the gradual fading of your own voice, your own needs, your own direction. Without awareness, kindness can become something that diminishes rather than strengthens. The path forward does not involve abandoning kindness. It involves redefining it. It requires the courage to look honestly at your patterns, to recognize where fear has been guiding your behavior, and to begin making different choices. This is where the process of integration truly begins. Integrating the shadow is not a comfortable process. It is not smooth, and it does not happen without resistance. It asks you to face parts of yourself that you have spent years avoiding. It is like stepping into a room that has been kept in darkness for a very long time. When the light is first turned on, what you see may feel overwhelming, but only by seeing clearly can anything begin to change. This process begins with a difficult realization. Much of what we call kindness has at times been driven by avoidance. We avoid conflict. We avoid rejection. We avoid the discomfort of being misunderstood. Beneath many acts of excessive giving lies a quiet fear. The fear that if we stop being everything others expect, we might lose their acceptance. To move beyond this pattern requires a specific kind of courage. It means being willing to disappoint people who have grown accustomed to your constant availability. It means rewriting an unspoken agreement you have carried for years. That agreement may have sounded like this: if I give enough, if I am always there, then I will be valued and loved. But now the terms begin to change. Now the agreement becomes, I will be honest about who I am, even if that means I cannot always meet your expectations. This shift does not make you less kind. It makes your kindness more real. There is a difference between a fragile flame that can be extinguished by the slightest disturbance and a steady fire that provides warmth without consuming itself. True kindness resembles the latter. It is stable because it is rooted in awareness, not in fear. When you begin to integrate your shadow, you start to understand that setting boundaries is not an act of rejection. It is an act out of clarity. It defines where you end and where another person begins. Without this clarity, relationships become blurred and giving loses its meaning. With it, kindness becomes intentional rather than automatic. The strength that emerges from this integration is not harsh or aggressive. It is grounded. It does not seek to dominate or control. Instead, it allows you to stand in your truth without the need to diminish others. This is an important distinction. Cruelty often arises from insecurity, from the need to assert power over others. But the power that comes from self-understanding does not need to prove itself. It simply exists. As this transformation deepens, your way of relating to others begins to change. You no longer give out of obligation or guilt. You give because you choose to. Your generosity is no longer a response to fear, but an expression of inner stability. This shift creates a noticeable difference. There is less resentment, less exhaustion, and more clarity in every interaction. You may also begin to notice that your emotions function differently. Anger, for example, no longer feels like something to suppress. Instead, it becomes informative. It signals when something is misaligned, when a boundary has been crossed, or when a need has been ignored. Rather than being destructive, it becomes a guide. In the same way, saying no begins to lose its negative connotation. It is no longer seen as selfish or unkind. It becomes a necessary part of maintaining balance. Every no protects the integrity of your yes. Without it, your agreements lose meaning. They become automatic responses rather than conscious decisions. This process also reveals that the shadow does not only contain what is painful or uncomfortable, it also holds qualities that have been overlooked or undervalued. Within it, you may find your assertiveness, your intuition, your ability to recognize when something is not right. These are not negative traits. They are essential aspects of a complete personality. As you learn to work with these aspects, your kindness develops a new quality. It becomes more discerning. It is no longer directed indiscriminately toward everyone and everything. Instead, it is guided by awareness. You begin to recognize when it is appropriate to give and when it is necessary to step back. This does not reduce your compassion. It refines it. This refined kindness respects both the giver and the receiver. It acknowledges that healthy relationships require balance. Giving without receiving creates instability. Receiving without giving creates dependence. True connection exists in the space where both are present. As you establish clearer boundaries, you may notice changes in your relationships. Some people may respond positively. They may appreciate the clarity and begin to relate to you in a more balanced way. Others may resist. They may have become accustomed to the version of you that always said yes. When that changes, they may feel uncomfortable or even withdraw. This can be difficult. It may feel like a loss, but it is also revealing. It shows which relationships were based on genuine connection and which were sustained by imbalance. Over time, what remains tends to be more authentic. Fewer relationships, perhaps, but deeper and more meaningful. The act of setting boundaries also requires developing a more precise understanding of your own emotional responses. You begin to distinguish between different types of discomfort. There is the discomfort that comes from growth, from doing something new and unfamiliar. And there is the discomfort that comes from self-betrayal, from acting against your own needs. Learning to recognize this difference is essential. You also begin to see that your energy is limited. Your time, your attention, your emotional capacity are not endless resources. They need to be managed with care. Giving without awareness leads to depletion. Giving with awareness allows you to sustain yourself while still supporting others. In this way, boundaries do not restrict your kindness. They protect it. They ensure that when you do give, it comes from a place of fullness rather than exhaustion. They allow your generosity to remain genuine rather than becoming mechanical. This entire process can be understood as a kind of inner transformation. It is the point where your light and your shadow begin to work together instead of against each other. Rather than trying to eliminate one in favor of the other, you allow both to exist and to inform your actions. Jung saw this integration as essential for psychological development. It is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. It is about recognizing that strength and compassion are not opposites, but complementary forces. When they are aligned, they create a form of presence that is both grounded and responsive. People who move through this transformation often develop a quiet confidence. They do not feel the need to prove their goodness or justify their boundaries. They understand that their worth is not dependent on constant approval. This understanding changes the way they interact with the world. Their kindness becomes more stable because it is no longer tied to external validation. Their power becomes more balanced because it is not used to control or dominate. Instead, it is used to protect what matters, including their own well-being. This does not mean the process is complete. Integration is not a final state. It is ongoing. Each new situation presents an opportunity to apply what has been learned. Each interaction offers a chance to refine the balance between giving and holding back, between openness and protection. Over time, this balance becomes more natural. It requires less effort. It becomes part of how you move through the world. You are no longer reacting automatically. You are responding consciously. This transformation also has an effect beyond the individual. When you begin to live in a more integrated way, it influences those around you. It shows others that it is possible to be both kind and strong, both compassionate and self-respecting. It offers an alternative to the extremes of self-sacrifice and self-centeredness. In this way, your personal growth becomes something that extends outward. It creates a different kind of interaction, one that is based on mutual respect rather than imbalance. It encourages others to examine their own patterns, even if only subtly. At its core, this journey leads to a redefinition of kindness. It is no longer a role you perform or a standard you try to meet. It becomes an authentic expression of who you are. It includes your limits as well as your generosity. It includes your strength as well as your compassion. You begin to understand that your value is not determined by how much you give or how much you sacrifice. It is inherent. It exists regardless of your actions. From this understanding, a different kind of freedom emerges. You are no longer driven by the need to prove your worth through constant giving. Instead, you act from choice. You give when it feels aligned. You step back when it does not. You engage with others in a way that reflects both your care for them and your respect for yourself. As you reach this point, the question changes. It is no longer about whether you're good enough. It becomes about whether you're willing to be fully yourself, whether you're willing to accept both your light and your shadow, not as opposing forces, but as parts of a single whole. This is the invitation that Jung's insight offers, not to become flawless, but to become complete, not to eliminate your darker aspects, but to understand and integrate them, not to abandon kindness, but to transform it into something that supports rather than diminishes you. And as you consider this, another question naturally arises. Are you ready to step into that kind of wholeness? Are you ready to move beyond the version of yourself that depends on approval and into one that is grounded in authenticity? Because the kind of power that emerges from this process is not the power to control others. It is the power to remain true to yourself. It is the power to act with clarity, to give without losing yourself, and to set limits without guilt. This is not a distant ideal. It is a possibility that begins with a simple shift in awareness. The moment you recognize that your kindness does not require self-denial, that your strength does not threaten your ability to care, and that your boundaries do not make you less worthy of love, something begins to change. From that moment forward, each choice becomes an opportunity to act from wholeness rather than fear, to relate to others with honesty rather than obligation, to build a life that reflects who you truly are rather than who you believe you must be. And in that process, you may discover something unexpected. That true kindness, the kind that is rooted in awareness and integration, does not weaken you. It becomes one of your greatest sources of strength.